All right, so we've went through and done all those edge extensions on different areas. If you could see in the time lapse, something I was actually doing was animating the erode amount and the outer edge push. So essentially, for a very motion blurred area, you kind of want, let me just do a new one so I can actually show. It's just better to, if there's less motion blur, for example, in this area, you can shrink down the outer edge push to as low as you can. And you see that you actually kind of retain a little bit of detail, but when you push it out a lot, it starts to become a little bit blurry. So basically, I keyed the outer edge push and the erode amount based on how much motion blur there was. So if I was doing the edge extend for this area, I would start out with a small amount. So I'd find something like this. I would push out the edge like this. And then as it goes, if I keep looking at that same area, there might be a moment where, see, now it starts to become a little brighter. So I don't want that. I want to keep it on the inside edge. So at that point, I would just need to take the erode amount and just shift it in a little bit. So I just kind of shove it back and maybe extend the outer edge a little bit more and then continue through. So I basically went through and did that. So here's another example. It's going off. You might want to go there and shove it in a little bit. So one thing to keep in mind with that is that's why I kind of did each area separately, because I don't want to push this area out a lot when there's not very much motion blur here compared to here. Here, there's a lot more motion blur, so our edge needs to be thicker. It doesn't need to be as thick there, so that's why we would do it as two different edge pushes. So that's just a brief explanation of all the little stuff I did there, and you can see me doing that in the time lapse. Now the last part we're going to do for the edge pushes, and we're going to do actually some edge painting. So we still have a couple little areas here, and we also have some edge pushing that's going a little bit too far. So let me just double check. Here is a good example of where it's going too far, because we see he has a dark sleeve here, but for some reason we see this like kind of globby, kind of light edge going around. So we can figure out where that's coming from. Let's just figure that out. So if I disable a couple of these at a time just to figure out which one is causing it. Let's see. So if I step through and find which one's doing it, it's probably this one here. Okay, so yeah, you see we only need to be replacing the area that is white in this part. So this is going way too far in this instance. So we need to just make sure that's not pushing it that far. So just put it right on the edge, and we retain a little bit more of that detail. And you see we're even still replacing more area than we need to. So occasionally what you can do is sort of, I'm going to leave it how it was. So if I undo, I'm going to leave it a bit bigger because it was kind of covering some areas there. But what you can do, of course, is take your alpha and sort of stencil it away from this effect, but just in this area. So for example, that's a little correction we could do. So we would take the alpha, which we can grab just from here, and I'm going to stencil it from our roto shape. So let's just look at our alpha. Alpha looks like this. So what we could do is adjust this alpha. So we go to the RGBA, white clamp, same thing, and just make it a little bit harsh like that and sort of stencil it. So let me just adjust that now so I can put in a road filter, and just kind of push it. And then you could blur that very slightly as well. So this is just showing you how you could fix these things to retain as much detail as possible. So that's one way you could definitely go about doing this. And you see that we're keeping a little bit more of that plate. And in our final comp, let's just see. So we're starting to keep a little bit more of that plate there. In this case, I don't know if I would worry about doing this. This is not something I would keep, but I don't know if I would do it this way necessarily. So I'm just going to delete this little section I just did. But that's an explanation of one way you could do it. The other way you could do it is a little bit of paint fixes. So I'm going to go back and do that real quick. So I'm going to put a row of paint here, say paint fixes. Paint fix 1. Paint fix 1. And then I'll just go here with a clone stamp, set the opacity to 0.1, and set the hardness to 0. And then I can basically just take this brush and sort of extend this edge a little bit. So I'm just going to paint it down like this so that it kind of retains a little bit of that natural color that it was having. So that's one way you can fix it. Another thing, you could do rotopaint stencil as well. So you could rotopaint and you could stencil away from your edge extend. So if your edge extend is being masked through this alpha, you could go here and say A stencil, and then you would just erase the parts that you don't want. So I would set this to 0.2, like a low opacity, and just kind of erase. Sorry, make this an over. This needs to be, actually, let me see. Yeah, so this is why. This needs to be a 4K thing. So, okay. Yeah, there we go. So we're just using a brush tool, stenciling from the rotoshape. So that's the rotoshape telling the edge extend where to go. And then we're just cutting away from it. So if there's some parts that we want to keep, sort of, we can, come on, the driver's being, this happens with the Wacom driver sometimes where it sticks a little bit. And yeah, so we can go in there and erase a little bit more, and we could darken that area if we want. So obviously that could take very long if you have a lot of areas like that. So I would just try to get those edge extends as close as you can first, and then if there's paint fixes after, then that's the last resort. But on these very motion blurred frames, it's going to be common that you'll probably have a couple little areas that you want to restore. So you see, I'm just trying to like keep a little bit of that detail by kind of checking. So area like this, I wouldn't use the edge extend much here. I'm going to probably go there with a paint fix, because areas that are trouble with edge extends are these corner areas. They don't, it doesn't do the greatest job there. Okay, so that's just an example, and then we'll go to the final comp. And all right, so those example, we can see the white is there again. So now we just go back with go to the paint fix, which is after the edge extend, and then we just clone stamp. So make sure we don't clone stamp the white back in. So I might make this brush size a little bit smaller and just fill these areas in. And make sure your output is set to RGB. That will really mess you up if that's not set there. So if I have my 1 viewer set there and my 2 viewer, so I just hit 2 on my keyboard, so I can kind of switch between. That's how we can just double check if everything's working. So this is working pretty well. Now the areas like this, I'm gonna just go with the paint fix. So, because you see there's a lot of streaking colors in here, and it's gonna be difficult to get edge extend to get those colors coming down the right angle. So this is where we have to do manual painting, and there's really not a lot of ways around this. So I'm just gonna go in there with the paintbrush and maybe set the opacity to 0.5 so we can do it a little bit easier. So now if I compare, you see we're starting to get rid of that white area. So you see it's starting to disappear there. And we can do the same way this way. So it kind of hides those areas and makes them disappear. Same for this area. We'll just go in there, take the colors around it, and sort of just paint that away. So this is how we can get rid of the much trickier areas that we're going to be dealing with. So again, this is obvious sign of edge extend is like when you have a dark color and it's going into a different, like lighter color. So I would just sort of try to make it the same color that's kind of going around. So a little bit of an edge paint might help in some areas like that. Same for here. You see how there's dark and then there's a little bit lighter edge. So this is like, these are like the level of detail you can really get into if you want. On a TV budget, I would say you're probably not gonna have to, paint every single edge like this. But I want to just demonstrate it so you guys have all the skill sets, no matter what you're working on. So here, I'm just going to use a color rather than trying to do a really small brush. So if I switch over to here and I select the color of this thing, so I'm going to control select here. I'm just going to take just a solid color and paint this. So you can hold shift to change the size of your brush and then just kind of go in there and paint that away. So, but you can tell it's not erasing it. So we're not actually erasing it. There's still something semi-transparent there. We're not just erasing or stenciling that away from the image. We're actually retaining the motion blur, and we're just changing the color. Okay, so that's how we're going to go through and frame by frame this. So yeah, I'll go here with the clone stamp and just continue around here. I'm going to turn off the clip to format so that we don't get this sort of stretching. And we can clone stamp our image. Yeah, I'll continue around. I'll take the color again and I'll just paint it in the gray. One thing to note is you don't want a million brush strokes in here. The RotoPaint will get slow if you have a lot of individual brush strokes. So what I recommend is doing your brush strokes and then just making a new RotoPaint once you start to have, I don't know, maybe 100 of them in one node. It's just kind of a glitch that's always existed in Nuke is you don't want a ton of brush strokes in one single node. So that's pretty good, and we can do the clone stamp again over here to try to keep the darkness going around. So this is the really tedious type of work you can get into. Some shots require this level of work, some don't, but it's not uncommon to have to do some form of these techniques in most shots. So I'll go in there with the paint. Maybe I'll switch my color to something lighter just for this area, and then something darker for this area. So it kind of blends together, but it doesn't go to one color. Sometimes you don't want to just do everything in one color because it'll be kind of obvious that it's a sort of a paint. And I'll select this color and then I'll just paint that again. So you can do a clone stamp or a solid color depending on what you're doing. But this is working pretty well. So I'm going to continue through with this, and I'll do a time lapse from this point. I don't think there's any other technique. We could fill with a roto and a constant, like how I showed before, but this is pretty much doing the same thing. It's just doing it with a paint. So I'm going to go through and do this, and we'll continue on in the next lesson.